gruesome story leads off our newscast.
Milwaukee police found body parts in a North Side apartment, and now they wonder if they've uncovered some kind of death factory.
You say in your book, Lionel, you say, I've come to believe that some of the compulsions that overwhelm my son may have had their origins in me.
The person to blame is sitting right across from you. That's the only person. Not parents, not society, not pornography. I mean, those are just excuses.
Years of the killing was in some type of ritualistic process, if you will.
The entire Dahmer family underwent a psychiatric evaluation. That Jeffrey and his brother told investigators they feared certain conduct by their father and that he should leave their home. And so,
at the same time, his father told authorities Dahmer had been abused by a neighbor boy at the age of 8.
Was Jeff sexually abused at any time?
No, never.
Was not abused by anyone in the home?
No.
Sexually?
No.
The scope of the crimes committed here are beyond Department 213, beyond Ohio, Illinois, and Wisconsin, and certainly beyond just one man, Jeffrey Dahmer. We will be discussing the facts of the case and in a way the birthing or manufacturing of the myth of the Milwaukee cannibal.
I've often wondered why I haven't had more dreams or nightmares about what I've done. For some reason, it's like it's blocked off from part of my mind.
May 21st, 1960, Jeffrey Dahmer was born into the world. For the past 9 months, he was being crafted in the bloodstream of a woman who was taking up to 26 prescription pills a day and suffered epileptic fits brought on by extreme sensory sensitivity that at times required direct injections to subdue. His father was a studying and later practicing chemist who would, only after Jeff's crimes had been committed, begin to question whether or not this extreme drug protocol may have affected Jeff's development in the womb. From Jeff's very conception, his mind may have been irreparably warped. Jeff would seem not to show it though, as he grew up an energetic and outgoing kid. He was born in Milwaukee, but quickly after he was born in 1962, his father would move he and his mother to Ames, Iowa, where Lionel would begin his study for his PhD. While living in Milwaukee, Lionel, Joyce, and Jeff all shared the same basement Jeff would later kill in. It is here in this move to Iowa that Jeff more than likely had his first memories. This could have been playing outside or roughhousing with his dad, but one memory has a higher probability than others to be his very first. In Iowa, it would seem Jeff was allergic to the place, as Lionel, who had moved the family on campus, would be going back and forth with Jeff to the clinic for seemingly endless infections Jeff had come down with, leading him time and again with a new round of injections. Several times during those years, he fell victim to various infections. Almost every week seemed to bring another round of illness. He often contracted ear and throat infections which would keep him crying through the night. Over and over he was taken to the university clinic for injections, and after a time, his little buttocks were covered with injection lumps, and he began to lash out at the nurses and doctors who labored to treat him. This unfortunately would not be the end of young Jeff's early medical intervention. that would leave any kid weary of the doctors. Jeff would begin to complain about a pain in his groin area, which was soon discovered to be a hernia. Lionel and Joyce were told that if this condition got any worse, the boy would need surgery. Right after Christmas in 1964, Jeff would have to be put under, alive but unconscious, and operated on under the knife, much like his later victims, as it was found that not only did he have a hernia, but the condition had worsened to a double hernia. This, of course, would have a profound effect on Jeff's child mind. This once outgoing and exploratory kid was now introverted and would stare blankly into space. His exploration turned from the world without to the world within. His father would remember of this time. He seemed to grow more inward, sitting quietly for long periods, hardly stirring, his face oddly motionless. Jeff had always showed a love for living creatures. After his surgery, though, and the discovery of the living world within that made everything work, Jeff's love turned to fascination, one that he would not act on right away, but nonetheless planted itself deeply in his mind. Jeff would become increasingly shy, which was made all the worse when the place he had known since his earliest memories would no longer be his home, and all the friends he had made he would never see again. After completing his PhD, Lionel would move the family to Akron and later Bath Township, Ohio, where he would begin to work for PPG Industries, a paint company that he would be employed for as a chemist. Before the move, Joyce had told Lionel she had wanted another child. This time she did not suffer the same epileptic fits, and nothing is mentioned of her drug use during her second pregnancy. Noticing the increased shyness of Jeff after the move, a few things were done to try to bring him out of his shell. He would get a dog, Frisky, and he would also be allowed to name the new addition to the family. He would name him David. After David's birth in December 1966, Joyce's mental stability would again slip away from her. Time and again, Lionel and Joyce would get into fights where Lionel would, according to author Brian Masters, try to calm his wife. Jeff sometimes saw his father hit his mother when she was screaming and he felt she needed to be calmed, but never brutally and never with malice. The domestic scene was by no means unusual or malignant. Yeah, we'll be coming to that later. Joyce's mental condition would only get worse, and on multiple occasions, Lionel would have Joyce institutionalized where she would surely be treated with more medications and therapy. It should be noted, though, that Joyce never had a history of mental health issues or drug abuse before meeting Lionel. They were the same age when they met on the campus of Marquette, and soon after they met, they would marry, and just as quickly, Jeff would be conceived. According to Joyce, it was after the beginning of her pregnancy that she saw Lionel for who he was. Without realizing it, I was drawn to a man very much like my father, a man as controlling and just as abusive.
And the caption underneath says, "The house in which Mr. Dahmer has admitted to his first murder." And I thought, Jeff's dad killed somebody.
The home was no refuge for Jeff, who would soon bike the streets and begin collecting animal carcasses and running experiments and dissections on them in the shed off the side of the house. This being all under the nose of his parents, supposedly. Lionel would state on multiple occasions that he never knew Jeff was running these experiments.
Can you talk freely there?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Do you remember ever me participating with bones when you were interested in bones?
No.
And were we eating chicken one time and you asked what would happen if we bleached the bones?
No.
Okay. So I never participated, so to speak, in, putting bleach in a pail.
No.
And working with bones.
No.
Did I ever describe anything to you?
Not that I can recall.
Not that there's anything wrong with that, because that could be just scientific curiosity,
No, nothing that I remember. I pretty much was doing things in my own little world.
Kept it all to yourself. Yeah.
Neither did they know that around this time Jeff discovered he was gay when a neighbor boy younger than himself initiated a sexual encounter with their son that he did not reject.
Oh, was age 13 when you had, I guess it was a homosexual experience. How did that happen? Who initiated that? We both did, sort of. I don't remember who actually initiated it, but we were both quite comfortable with it. Both of you sort of at the same time initiated it. Yeah. And was it always, it was just light, just kissing and holding. Nothing, didn't go beyond that. No masturbation or anything? No, not that I remember. And you didn't even think of telling me or Mom? Hell no.
This, of course, would be one amongst many things about Dahmer's own life that he could not recall. We will get to his missing memory quite shortly. Sherry, Jeff's later stepmother that married Lionel just as quickly as he had gotten divorced, would later state in the paper she always thought Lionel guided Jeff on these experiments. If true, then before Jeff even reaches high school, he would already have the skill set to commit his later crimes. Being in close contact with death, a smell hardly possible not to recognize, running chemical experiments on the corpses and stealing for himself a collection of bones, all under the noses of those that he lived with. But that, of course, is not all he would do.
Jim Kipple was Dahmer's neighbor for 10 years, but never a friend. In fact, when Dahmer was arrested Tuesday, Kipple had to dig into his high school yearbook to remember who Dahmer was.
The kids around the neighborhood, we got together, but never really remember him, you know. He was always at home and played by himself a lot.
Kipple, however, does remember a gruesome discovery he made 17 years ago while walking with his younger brother in a wooded area about a half-mile behind the Dahmer home.
I walked up and then I realized that it was a dog. And it was a pretty good-sized carcass, and it had been ripped open, you know, gutted, you know, all over, the guts hanging around, and decapitated, and the head was actually on a tree, like all in line. It was a real strange thing because there was a cross and the dog hanging, and then the head behind it on a tree. And then there was actually a path going down to little fires. Like it looked like a devil worshiping or whatever they do.
This would be, as far as we know, Jeff's first occult ritual. At just 13 years old, everything would now be in place for Dahmer to become the Milwaukee Cannibal. Bear with me while we take a short break from the Dahmer story to tell you about a few things that took place in the 1970s that will be quite relevant, trust me.
By the early 1970s, word of the CIA's mind control atrocities began to leak out to the public. An investigation was launched, resulting in the creation of one presidential commission and 2 Senate committees.
And my feeling now is that the CIA had overall powers that put them in a different situation than other people.
The American public was in shock.
I am terribly upset that the system is such that what happened could happen.
Their search for answers, however, would soon hit a dead end, as investigators learned that Dr. Sidney Gottlieb had destroyed the majority of the documents relating to the MKULTRA program. It was now impossible for the American public to discover the truth about what the CIA learned from its mind control research. Officially, the agency's position would be that 30 years of aggressive experimentation had yielded few, if any, productive results.
July 7th, 1975, a story was hitting the papers in each state in the US, each province in Canada, and broke in the Sunday Times in London. Here are just some of those headlines. Report accuses Navy of training assassins. Psychologist says US Navy trained political assassins. And Clockwork Orange assassins drafted. What this story disclosed was the result of an interview with Lieutenant Commander Dr. Thomas Narut, a psychologist working at the U.S. Naval Hospital in Naples, Italy. Attending a conference sponsored by NATO in Oslo, Norway, Narut gave a speech among 120 different psychological researchers about the effect stress from combat has on soldiers. After his 10-minute speech, reporters followed him off stage to ask a few questions. He then let journalist Peter Watson sit down with him for a one-on-one, and what he said made worldwide headlines.
The committee does not believe that the acts which it has examined represent the real American character. They do not reflect the ideals which have given the people of this country and of the world hope for a better, fuller, fairer life.
At the time of his disclosure, many hearings were taking place about the alleged abuses of intelligence agencies back home in America. Feeling what he was up to was bound to come out, he decided to reveal just what exactly he meant when he was speaking on stage. What he outlined was a process of funneling men who had either killed or had the mental aptitude for killing without remorse into training programs nothing short of the process out of the film A Clockwork Orange. He describes fitting the head of the subjects into fixed positions and clamping their eyes open, forcing them to watch films in increasing brutality, films specially designed to show people being killed and injured in violent ways. According to Dr. Narut, They were establishing how to induce servicemen who may not be naturally inclined to kill to do so under certain conditions, and that this clockwork-style training is done to heighten their dissociative powers with regard to killing. Previous research on those given awards for valor in battle has shown, according to Dr. Narut, that the best killers are men with passive-aggressive personalities. They are people with a lot of drive, though they are well-disciplined and do not appear nervous, who periodically experience bursts of explosive energy when they can literally kill without remorse. Asked whether he was suggesting that murderers were being released from prisons to become assassins, he replied that it's happened more than once. Shortly after this, Narut disappeared for a week from his home and his work to resurface and claim that what he had disclosed was only hypothetical, and the Navy categorically denied they were selecting assassins out of a pool of convicted murderers. Back in the States, multiple hearings had taken place with the primary aim of auditing the actions of the CIA. A quote from the New York Times. Admiral Turner said that the CIA had secretly supported human behavior control research at 80 institutions, including 44 colleges or universities, as well as hospitals, prisons, and pharmaceutical companies. Drugs, hypnosis, and electroshock were all but a few of the methods used in the research of human behavior control. What was being exposed would be known as Project MKULTRA, an umbrella program that encompassed hundreds of sub-projects taking place in every single prominent field. From the military to the prisons, hospitals, pharma companies, and universities, no sector escaped the grasp of the CIA's experimental aims. Extremely compartmentalized, only few knew they were taking part in something much larger than a single project. Through documents later released, though heavily redacted, it is still clear that an interest was taken in those suffering from a split personality. The use of such a condition in military scenarios is quite clear. We know that dual and even multiple personality can be both caused and cured by hypnotism. Moreover, the Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde combination is a very real one, once it is established. The key to creating an effective spy or assassin rests in splitting a man's personality, or creating a multiple personality with the aid of hypnotism. This is not science fiction, I have done it. This quote coming from George Estabrook, an intelligence asset perched at the top of the projects concerning the creation of MPD soldiers. During World War II, I worked this technique with a vulnerable Marine lieutenant I'll call Jones. Under the watchful eye of Marine intelligence, I split his personality into Jones A and Jones B. Jones A, once a normal working Marine, became entirely different. He talked communist doctrine and meant it. He was welcomed enthusiastically by communist cells and was deliberately given a dishonorable discharge by the Corps, which was in on the plot, and became a card-carrying party member. The Joker was Jones B, the second personality, formerly apparent in the conscious Marine. Under hypnosis, this Jones had been carefully coached by suggestion. Jones B was the deeper personality, knew all of the thoughts of Jones A, was a loyal American, and was imprinted to say nothing during conscious phases. All I had to do was hypnotize the whole man, get in touch with Jones B, the loyal American, and I had a pipeline straight into the communist camp. It worked beautifully for months with this subject, but the technique backfired. While there was no way for an enemy to expose Jones's dual personality, they suspected it and played the same trick on us later. What is clear from the works of Estabrook and the released but redacted documents of MKUltra, MKSearch, Artichoke, and Bluebird is the interest and success in creating MPD soldiers using many methods, though integral to the process was the use of hypnosis. Many victims suffering from MPD have shown severe trauma as a result of sexual or physical abuse in the home to be the cause of the fracture of their psyche. Fight or flight responses are triggered when such abuse occurs, but without the ability to fight or flee, the mind splits to avoid greater dysfunction.
Those psychological profiles, which often prove to be right on target, are produced by FBI men like Agent Bob Ressler. Ressler is a specialist in the psychology of serial murder. He has talked face-to-face with more multiple murderers than anyone, and he uses that experience to analyze unsolved crimes.
Over the years, I'm talking about probably 20 years of my experience in law enforcement, I've interviewed hundreds upon hundreds of criminals. I spoke to Manson at length. Sirhan, some of the assassins, David Berkowitz, son of Sam Killer. The types of crimes you're seeing today did not really occur with any known frequency prior to the 50s. An individual taking 10, 12, 15, 25, 35 lives is a relatively new phenomena in the crime picture of the United States. I feel that serial murder is becoming somewhat of an epidemic problem in this country. We're finding that more and more people are involving themselves in this type of crime. Prior to 1950s, we did not see this type of crime in any significance. Today, you can hardly open a newspaper without seeing information concerning a number of crimes that have gone on across the country where people are killing in serial fashion. And in this particular case, the most perplexing thing, of course, that the police encountered was a written message on the wall saying, for heaven's sakes, catch me before I kill more, I cannot control myself. Jeffrey Dahmer got to me personally. Gary Boyle, his defense attorney, asked me to testify on his behalf.
Mr. Boyle?
This nice, pleasant young man. How do you explain it? When we sat down to talk, I was surprised to see how quick Jeff Dahmer opened up. I asked him his feelings when all this was happening, and you know, was he really enamored and into this sort of thing? He said no. He said it was like he was operating in a mechanical fashion, and it was as if he was looking down at himself and watching this occur. This is a clear indication of dissociation. Dissociation carried out to its end would be multiple personality disorder. It was like there were two Jeffs. One was into the horror of it all, and the other was standing back and watching.
Lionel and Jeff both completely deny any such abuse occurred. The way Jeff turned out and the crimes he committed was all a freak occurrence. Ressler, in fact, did not testify, and not a single psychologist posited the idea that Jeff was suffering from MPD when it was quite clear he had symptoms that would be hard to dismiss with a better explanation. No explanation is given for Jeff waking up next to the body of his second victim, whom he had apparently murdered by bashing his chest with his fists in a blacked out state that left him with no memory.
You totally blacked out?
Yeah.
You had no idea that you had done anything?
No, not until I woke up in the morning. I couldn't believe it.
How did you know he was dead? Did you check his pulse?
Right, yeah. And there was blood coming out of his mouth. Apparently I had beaten him with my fists on the chest.
No explanation is given for the variation in each of his confessions, which again, I must remind you were dictated by the detectives from their memory instead of being recorded, which was common practice by then.
You didn't tape his discussions, did you?
No, I did not.
There's no phonographic recording of them.
No, there isn't.
There is no other type of other than your typewritten notes. We have no other record of his discussions with you, Detective Kennedy, and the other officers, correct?
That's correct, other than our notes and our recollections.
Sure, I understand. Question. 60 hours, you had not put down every single solitary question and answer on paper that was asked of Mr. Dahmer during that 60 hours.
No, we didn't.
Of course. You had to make judgment calls as to what was important, sufficiently important that you put it down when you thought it was. Things that weren't important, you didn't, right?
That's correct.
That's normal police procedure.
That's correct.
Jeff can't remember the 6 hours previous to his arrest. As described by the second and last survivor at the Oxford apartments, whom we can presume saw everything many of the victims saw before their deaths, Jeff would switch between multiple people. Tracy would go as far as to say this was an interchange and not the result of Jeff's consumption of alcohol.
Did you know that some people, when they have too much to drink, change their moods? Was that the kind of mood changes he was having, or a different kind of mood change?
I think this was like more of an inner mood change than an alcoholic mood change.
What kind of mood?
It's like
inner mood?
Yeah, person change, not alcohol change.
These changes were also brought on by the viewing of The Exorcist III that Jeff would put on to get in the mood, and with the testimony of Tracy Edwards, his desire to be possessed through the viewing of the film.
Was there any parts of the movie that was going on that you saw that he said anything about?
It was like the part about the preacher that used to be a preacher that had got possessed, and that it would seem like he was like interested in that part. That part had his attention more than anything.
Tell us about what you mean by that. What impressions were made upon your mind when this was going on as to had his attention? How did he appear to you?
It appeared like it was like he wanted to mimic it or be like that part, you know, being demonized or whatever in that nature.
I'm sorry.
With the cause of such symptoms, with many more examples to come throughout the video, being abused at an early age, it is a wonder there are no signs or reports of Jeff being abused at any time in his childhood. Well, it just so happens there are. In the records of Jeff's parole officer Donna Chester was the discussion she had with a family member of the Dahmer family in April 1990. On the topic of Jeff's clear sexual dysfunction, he speculated that it may have something to do with an incident that occurred when Jeff was 8. What the man told Donna was that Jeff had been molested by an older boy in the neighborhood, and that this may have had something to do with his sexual perversions. This man was none other than Lionel Dahmer himself.
The observations of his probation officer contained in this 100-page file obtained by Channel 2. In November of 1989, while still spending nights and weekends in jail, he was found to be drinking. In April of 1990, a month after his release on probation, he frequently missed appointments with his probation officer. He repeatedly had to be threatened with arrest warrants. At the same time, his father told authorities Dahmer had been abused by a neighbor boy at the age of 8.
Given the hundreds of people Jeff says he slept with, there are surprisingly few who step forward to say that they have been with him. Back when Jeff's crimes were first revealed to the world, many near the case or associated with it were making the rounds on talk shows, and soon, one man would come forward to talk about his experience with Jeff in 1985. Going under the pseudonym Nick and having his identity masked, he would disclose something that cuts the show short.
First, let me just ask Nick, 31 years old. Is it fair to say, Nick, that you were Jeffrey Dahmer's former lover?
Geraldo, at the time that I met him, it was more off as a relationship, semi-regular.
How long did it last, Nick?
It began in the end of June, beginning of July in 1985, for approximately 2 months, 2.5 months.
You had a question for Nick?
Yes, I do, because there's been some conflict, Nick. I don't want to pry into your affairs too much, but this is really bothering me. When this story first broke in the papers, I still have family in Ohio, and I've kept up with this very closely. That Jeffrey had been molested when he was 8 years old by a neighbor, and that once when he was with you, he got drunk and told you that indeed it was his father and not a neighbor who molested him.
Is that true, Nick?
Yes, it is.
Jeffrey Dahmer told you that his father molested him?
In the course of our relationship, I guess, I was inquisitive into the background of his life because he had no family. He did, but he did not claim any. He had a lot of hate and nothing good to say about it. And there was a time I asked, what was your first sexual experience, basically, to find a way, you know, how it developed into homosexual or heterosexual, etc. And he broke down and he told me for several years that he was abused by his father sexually.
Is his father still alive?
His father's still alive.
All right, then I've got to say this. I've got to say his father's not here to defend himself. We're hearing one side of the story. We make no statement as to the veracity of the charge, the horrible charge you just heard, but I'm sure that Jack can factor that into his analysis, which comes next. I've got to take a break. I'm sorry.
Next, on the Phil Donahue Show, he sits among the guests, though still going by Nick. He would be shut down immediately upon disclosing his story once again.
And I think it was for a reason that in the relationship, asking certain things but to not draw it on, I asked him where his first sexual experience was. His first sexual experience was with his father.
He said to you?
Oh, yes, absolutely.
All right, this is without proof. We should say that. I mean, if we're going to be responsible at all, we should...
That's true, but I see...
Any lawyer anywhere would remind the jury that this is hearsay. That's all right. I thank you for your contribution here.
I'll leave it to you to determine if Nick was telling the truth. Lionel attended many top-ranking universities in his studies and would immediately get a job at a prominent chemical company upon the completion of his schooling. His environments would undoubtedly be trolled by intelligence, but there is no proof that Lionel would be interested in anything of the sort documented in the papers released on Bluebird, Artichoke, MK Search, or MKUltra, right? As we are told, Lionel was so consumed with his work and so confused on how to deal with Joyce, he had no time for his sons, and as a result, Jeff was neglected by both his mother and his father. All of the years of Jeff's life, as he slipped into madness, his father was so blinded by his marriage and his work, he wouldn't notice his sons smelt like dead animals, or see any signs he was digging around in them and collecting the bones to clean in his shed using his chemicals. He wouldn't notice Jeff was an alcoholic by the time he was a freshman. Jeff's interest in the occult, as shown by his makeshift sacrifices in the woods, also wouldn't be noticed by Lionel, who claims he raised his son Christian. It was a level of obliviousness, or perhaps denial, that was scarcely imaginable, and yet it was real. It was as if I had locked my son in a soundproof booth, then drawn the curtains so that I could neither hear nor see what he had become. This line of thinking and level of tunnel vision would show itself even in Lionel's youngest years. Here's an excerpt from Lionel's book, A Father's Story, released the same year Jeff was killed. One memory in particular returned to me. It concerned a little girl named Junie who lived across the street from me when I was a young boy, around 12 or 13. One afternoon I brought her up to my bedroom, lit a candle, sat her in front of it, and began to murmur the "you are getting sleepy" phrases that I had learned from a book and record I'd sent away for her some weeks before. They had dealt with hypnotism, and I had sent away for them because, in my own childlike way, I saw its mystifying powers as a means by which I could control people whom I could not otherwise control. It would allow me to turn them into hypnotized zombies so that I could do whatever I wanted with or to them. Junie was my first experiment, and when I brought her to my room that day, I intended to cast a spell over her so that I can control her entirely. With that goal in mind, I told Junie to stare at the candle, and she did so. I told her to close her eyes at the appropriate moment, and she did that too. I told her to breathe deeply, and she did. I told her to raise her arms over her head. She obeyed instantly. I remember that I felt exhilarated as I watched her, felt truly powerful, truly in command of another human being. Junie was doing everything I asked. She was hypnotized. However, she fell off the chair and woke up. Later in life, I would often tell this story, but always lightly, as if it were simply a childhood adventure. Thus, even though I was later to make light of the story, it is clear to me now that the act itself betrayed a strong urge to control her. And so now, when I remember this incident, I can no longer see it as a simple childhood prank, a harmless little boy dabbling in a newfound magic. Instead, I remember the sense of power that came over me as Junie sank into her trance. I remember how much I liked controlling her, how much I enjoyed, however briefly, that sense of giving commands and having them instantly obeyed. I remember all of this as an event in my psychological history that suggests how much, even as a boy, I had yearned to control other people, how powerless I had often been made to feel in the presence of people I did not control. With the willingness to act on urges of such an extreme measure at such a young age and a disturbing amount of gratification at his success, does it take much to wonder if Joyce's overuse of medication had another motivation and force behind it? Especially in the time in which a child was growing in the womb with up to 26 pills a day coursing through her bloodstream. Was Lionel, a studying and later practicing chemist, truly blind to the effects that her medication might have had on Jeff?
She was taking quite a few different types of medication and many pills of the same type of medication, a lot of pills at the time just before Jeff was born, in the last trimester. And while I was trying to search every possible reason why Jeff turned out the way he did, one of the things that crossed my mind, of course, was the effect of chemicals, biochemicals on the brain, and especially just before birth. At times her legs would lock tightly,
in place, and her whole body would grow rigid and begin to tremble. During these strange seizures, her eyes would bulge like a frightened animal, and she would begin to salivate, literally frothing at the mouth.
Lionel describes a strange, undiagnosed problem. He describes it as some kind of a seizure that you developed, a proneness to seizures late in the pregnancy, where he describes it as a kind of rigidness for which you were prescribed medications. Do you remember that, and can you describe
I
it?
don't remember that at all. I can't imagine where that comes from. It isn't true. I don't.
You don't recall anything like that?
No.
Seizures or
No.
seizure-like episodes?
Absolutely not.
There's an obvious discrepancy here between what you're saying and what Lionel is saying about the nature of the pregnancy. It was difficult, you both agree, but he describes you in these states where you were, as he says, literally frothing at the mouth.
Are you serious?
We are left in the dark as to the possible influence that left this impression on Lionel. But by 13, we can clearly establish a foundational drive to find a means of control and a willingness to apply the science on unsuspecting victims. I would use a different word, but I'm not sure there is a more fitting one for what Lionel was doing. Would this up-and-coming chemist be blind to the possible application of his trade to establish just the ideal that enthralled him at such a young age? The ability to control someone entirely? Given this desire, would his entry into the field of chemistry itself, at a time in which the study of drug-induced mind control is being mapped out by the educational, medical, and military institutions, be something he would decline if given the opportunity? If Junie was his first experiment, who were his second, third, and fourth? Predictably, as the evidence accumulated and became increasingly ghastly, I made myself believe that Jeff could not have done such things on his own, but that he had acted only as the tool of someone else, someone more evil than my son, someone who had taken advantage of Jeff's loneliness and isolation and had turned him into a terrible slave.
That 1 week when when the circumstances were all right, lo and behold, what do I see? Just that one time, that 1 week. Never again did I see anybody like that. It's almost like it was prearranged by someone, huh? It's just so weird. I don't know what to say. Someone or something.
During Dahmer's senior year, the family had finally fractured after years of physical abuse, emotional distress, and iatrogenic drug use, which resulted in trips to the psych ward. Under court order, Lionel was sent out of the house and stayed at a nearby motel with his soon-to-be wife, Sherry. Not long after this, Joyce herself would take David and flee to a family member's house before moving out of the state entirely. All of this as Jeff's graduation and prom was right around the corner. Jeff, by now, was a full-blown alcoholic.
Sitting next to him in a first period, I believe, history class, and he had a styrofoam cup of scotch, I believe it was scotch. I remember saying, "Jeff, what is that?" And he threw his head back and he shook it and he said, "It's my medicine." But clearly he was getting drunk at 8 o'clock in the morning.
And got high each chance he could, which would not be few and far between, as he was friends with local drug dealer and occult practitioner Jeff Six. Jeff Six was known to the Dahmer family and was even said to have been told to cut contact with Jeff by Lionel after some jewelry went missing from the Dahmer household. Shortly after prom, Jeff invited his date back to his house with a few others, Six likely being one of them, for what, to the understanding of the prom date, was a party. What this party turned out to be was a seance conducted to contact a spirit which now lived in Dahmer's house. June 18th, 1978. Stephen Hicks is hitchhiking his way to a concert when a car pulls up beside him with a young man, Jeffrey Dahmer, behind the wheel, offering him beers over at his house. With no one at the house, Hicks and Jeff drank and smoked a little. According to Jeff's initial confession, only hours after his arrest, he states he and Hicks had sex, and once Hicks wanted to leave, they then got into a fight where Dahmer reached for a barbell and struck Hicks with it. He says the strike from the barbell killed Hicks. Then, less than 24 hours later, he states that Hicks was not a homosexual and they did not have sex. All this time, Dahmer did not offer the name of Hicks. 3 days later, when prompted if it was Hicks he killed in Ohio, he agrees that that was the name because you never forget your first, but I guess he forgot to remember. In the same confession, he also remembers new details and changes others. No fight was mentioned, In fact, the attack with the barbell was less spur of the moment and more premeditated, as Jeff states he walked up behind him and bashed his skull. But this did not in fact kill him, as previously stated, as Jeff now adds the detail of him strangling the life out of Hicks with the barbell. Once this was disclosed, a search began to find this murder weapon of Jeff's. After Dahmer killed Hicks, he took his body under the house and used everything he had learned up until that point to dispose of the remains. Of course, he kept the skull for a bit, but this was not for anything occult related. It was only for his own gratification. He then loaded the fresh remains into garbage bags and put them in the back seat of his father's car, which Jeff says he used to borrow to go to the movies earlier in the day. As Masters says, Dahmer downed some more beers to muster up the courage. Jeff was swerving over the roads on his way to the local dump to rid himself of the remains of his first victim. Soon he was stopped by an officer who noticed the erratic driving and even inquired as to the contents of the bags, which Dahmer said was simply garbage, and the officer, who could not differentiate between the smell of garbage and death, believed him. Regardless, he told Jeff to step out. The officer called backup. Jeff then completed a sobriety test, all the while the dripping remains sat in the back seat of his father's car. The two officers who could not tell the smell of a rotting corpse also couldn't tell Dahmer was drunk, and so he was let off with a driving left of center ticket. This officer, like many others who find themselves in similar situations, failed upwards. Later sent to Ohio to interview Dahmer, Officer, now Lieutenant Munsey, looked into the records of Dahmer to find he was the one who pulled over Dahmer 13 years ago. This would certainly not be the last time Dahmer easily evaded police suspicion and protocol. Accounts vary on how exactly he disposed of Hicks, but what is known is his bones were eventually smashed and scattered over the property that was soon to be sold. And the barbell that Jeff killed Hicks with? Well, it was found in the possession of Lionel. No smell remained in the car, and no evidence was left that multiple bags of a dismembered human corpse was in the back seat just hours ago, as Hicks was killed on a Sunday, and presumably Jeff's dad would have to be at work early the next day, yet no mention is made that he noticed anything amiss. One reason might be because, according to Lionel, he didn't know Jeff was alone until August, when Jeff stopped responding to his calls. Naturally, he would be under no assumption Jeff would need his car for anything, and as he tells it in his book, Jeff used his mom's car. Of course, we know this also isn't true, as in many accounts, she loaded her stuff up and left with David. So if Lionel says Jeff didn't borrow his car, and couldn't have borrowed Joyce's, whose car did he take? During this break, I attended a field party in Bath with Mike and a few others. Surprisingly, Lloyd Figg showed up, and as usual, was behaving like an annoying idiot. He danced around us, babbling that he knew a secret. Finally, one of us said, "Okay, Figg, what secret?" But then Figg clammed up and quickly vanished. Looking back now, I wonder if he knew of the Hicks murder. Did Dahmer blurt something out? Figg was the last of the lower caste psychos, some of whom were serious drug users, with whom Dahmer stayed in contact with after high school. These friendships, if they could be called that, would all peter out by the end of that summer. Only Figg, who didn't live far away, maintained contact. This was the last friendship Dahmer would have in his life. Jeff Six has went on to have his own lengthy criminal history. He has yet to be interviewed about his friendship with Dahmer.
Teenagers across America are playing with a new and frightening game, Satanism.
In the middle of a satanic seance with a pentagram drawn on the living room table, and his friends passed out at the residence, his father came knocking after supposedly having no contact with Jeff since the time Joyce left. Little food, a broken fridge, and an alcoholic teenager in the middle of a ritual with his friends is what Sherry and Lionel came upon that day. Violating the court order, Lionel would move back in and bring Sherry with him. Soon after, as Lionel would put it, he discovers Jeff's alcoholism. Before this point, he had no clue Jeff had ever even had a drink. So for years, while teachers and classmates witnessed his developing alcoholism, Lionel, who as it is described in his book found out because Sherry smelt the alcohol in Jeff's room from the hallway, never noticed such a smell himself. Never once noticed Jeff slur his speech, stumble around, or have any scent of alcohol on his breath. This is beside the fact he also became a habitual pot smoker, but I guess the pronounced smell of marijuana escaped Lionel's senses as well for years on end. Of course, it makes much more sense for Lionel to put the development of his son's alcoholism on the other side of his first murder. Something so traumatic would cause most to seek an escape. But of course, we know it came long before his first victim, so again, one has to wonder why Jeff was so inclined to escape into drugs well before he killed his first victim.
Have you ever had a dream where you woke up in the morning thinking you killed somebody. And you wake up and you're in panic. You say, God, I wish this was a dream. And all of a sudden you say, oh my God, it was a dream. He woke up every day hoping that was a dream, and it wasn't a dream.
Jeff was soon enrolled at Ohio State, a university named in the participation of MKULTRA, with the only class the supposedly alcoholic Jeff was passing being riflery. It would soon be clear he had no ambition in academics and dropped out by Christmas that year. He spent his days there, as we are told, getting drunk, donating his blood to get his hands on liquor to the point where his fingernails were marked so he could not come more than twice a week. In his room were music records, a collection of liquor bottles, and on the wall a pinned picture of then Vice President Walter Mondale. No indication could be given at the time that would show any interest in politics from Jeff. And so to those who shared the dorm room with him, it would be quite a mystery why Jeff would like to have the visage of Mondale in his presence each day. What they were not privy to then, as we are now, was that Jeff had actually been in the presence of Mondale only months before.
And Jeff said, I have an idea, let's go see the vice president. And we sort of all laughed and said, yes, sure, the vice president.
Jeff went to a payphone. When he returned, he announced that they would be seen in the office of Vice President Walter Mondale in 2 hours.
He had explained that we were high school students from Ohio working on our school newspaper, and we were in town for a week, and could we come and talk to someone in the vice president's office?
His slick talking worked. Dahmer had gotten his classmates inside the executive office building to meet with Mondale.
While on a senior class trip to Washington, D.C., Jeffrey Dahmer made a call from a payphone and then announced to his high school classmates that he had secured them an appointment to visit the office of the Vice President of the United States. Though his friends naturally were skeptical, Jeffrey did indeed lead them on a tour of Walter Mondale's office, followed by a visit to the office of prominent writer Art Buchwald. It has never been explained how the aspiring serial killer had established such impressive contacts in Washington, and it has never been revealed who it was Dahmer called that day to arrange the impromptu private tours. How Jeff knew the number to call and who to talk to is unknown. What is known is this is not the first time a past, present, or future serial killer has gotten positive attention from those holding office. 7 months after Dahmer's trip to D.C., and less than a month after his time at Ohio State, Jeff would be off to Anniston, Alabama for basic training at Fort McClellan. Jeff would join the Army at the urging of Lionel, and here is where Jeff's story and that of another serial killer begin to have parallels not easily brushed aside. March 24th, 1987, just months before Dahmer would begin his killing spree, Gary Heidnik would become known to those of Philly and the nation as a whole after he was found to have kept sex slaves in his basement and cooked the flesh of those that died. Both Heidnik and Dahmer share what is almost a mirrored military experience. In 1961, Heidnik would join the Army, and after initially requesting to become military police, he was denied and was trained as a medic at Fort Sam Houston. After Dahmer's basic training at Fort McClellan, and also after being rejected from a military police position, he was also sent to Fort Sam Houston to train as a medic. In July 1979, Dahmer is sent off to West Germany to be stationed as a combat medic. Soon after Heidnik completed his training, he was also sent off to West Germany. Both men were honorably discharged with full benefits. Both men would go on to do horrible things. Only difference being it was later found Heidnik was actually experimented on in the Army with LSD treatments. From Gary Heidnik's history, it was clear that his first psychosis was facilitated by a near-lethal dose of hallucinogenic substance given to him while he was in Germany in the military, at the time when the CIA was reportedly conducting human experimentation on our servicemen. His time back home would see him in and out of psychiatric hospitals, yet he would also turn $1,500 into $500,000 in the stock market in short order. Heidnik is among many others who would become infamous national figures after psychological experimentation was done on them. Of course, no such experimentation has been admitted for Dahmer. Dahmer's time in the military was marked by his excessive use of alcohol and his constant receiving of warnings to no avail. This is all documented in his records, which are easily accessed online. Of course, there is much not discussed or documented in the records. Soon after Dahmer's arrival in Germany, women in the surrounding area would turn up dead in brutal mutilation murders. In Dahmer's confession, it is revealed his memory about a Thanksgiving night in Germany is vastly different than what was remembered by multiple people. For Thanksgiving in November 1979, Carlos Cruz and his wife invited some of the younger soldiers to share the traditional celebration dinner at their home. Among them was Dahmer and a soldier named Preston Davis. While they were having dinner, the snow began to fall heavily outside, and Cruz suggested that it would be wiser for them all to stay the night. For some reason or other, Dahmer and Davis fell into an argument, and Davis told him to get the hell back to Baumholder. Jeff decided to leave, and he quietly walked out of the door into the snow at 10:30 p.m. Baumholder was about 8 miles distant, around a mountain, and it was freezing cold. When Cruz realized what had occurred, he went out to search for about 15 minutes but was driven indoors by the cold to get heavier clothes. He went outside and looked for another half an hour before he finally gave up, assuming Jeff had found a taxi to take him to Baumholder. 4 hours later, Jeff was back at the door. Davis called out, "Here's the orphan," and they all welcomed him back inside. He appeared confused, vague, his mind elsewhere. He had also lost his glasses. His jacket was not especially cold to the touch as they might have expected, nor was he as affected as a man who had been 4 hours in sub-zero temperatures ought to be. Cruz took him to the kitchen where he washed his hands energetically. Cruz thought he noticed signs of blood on his clothes. Jeff then sat down and stared at the kitchen table. He told Cruz that he could not remember where he had been nor what he had been doing, but he assumed it must have been something bad. Could he have tried to damage himself with his own spectacles? He was considered weird enough to be a suicide case, that much is certain. More likely, he had found a hole somewhere and just sat there thinking. Masters sure knows how to reassure a reader nothing more is going on here. Upon Dahmer's arrest and confession, he of course has no memory of this happening. In fact, his memory dictates he was actually present the whole night and never left in a snowstorm. I informed him that we had a call from Carlos Cruz, who stated that he had been in the service with Mr. Dahmer while in Germany. Mr. Dahmer stated that he does remember him and in fact has nothing to hide regarding Germany. He stated that he does remember spending Thanksgiving at Mr. Cruz's residence, and he stated also present was an individual with the last name of Davis, another girl who was with Davis, and also Mr. Cruz's wife. He indicated that he did have Thanksgiving dinner at that location, and he did become involved in an argument with Mr. Davis regarding where they were going to spend the evening because there were not many bedrooms. He stated that he was drunk because he had drank heavily, and it was snowing hard, similar to a blizzard, but he stated that he did not leave the house. He related that he remembers staying there and leaving in the morning, but he doesn't remember leaving at night, nor does he remember being covered with blood or having blood on any type of clothing. He stated that Mr. Cruz's wife should be able to verify his statement that he did not leave that night or at any time. He again denies being involved in any homicides in Germany and stated that he could not recall any other occurrences where he may have been away from the post other than when he went to Oktoberfest for 3 days in Munich, which he believes was in August 1980. Again, Mr. Dahmer denies being involved in any homicides in Germany or in any other place other than the ones he already confessed to. Report dictated by Detective Dennis Murphy. Of course, this would be the one Oktoberfest to suffer a terrorist attack. The Davis in this story would later appear on talk shows along with Billy Capshaw, a former Army roommate of Dahmer's. Both make claims of being raped by Dahmer, but Capshaw details much more gruesome crimes and the involvement of more than one man.
Capshaw was beaten and raped and received full disability for what the Army later admitted was his torture at the hands of his roommate. And Capshaw says he might not have been the only victim. Sometimes Dahmer would go out at night and come back the next morning, his shirt soaked in blood.
In the last 2 months of Dahmer's service, his drinking had gotten so bad he was supposedly put on a program where he would be held in his room and not allowed to leave without an escort. Soon, Dahmer in March of '81 would be discharged honorably with full benefits. Heidnik would be discharged honorably as well, though he would receive full disability and did not even file for it. Other things had to be considered as well, such as the Army's desire to get Heidnik out of the service with a full disability. Only 1 in 18,000 people who file for mental disability get 100%, and only 1 in 79,000 receive it for life. My client gets it for life, and he didn't want it. He didn't file for it. Dahmer's feet soon landed in South Carolina, being discharged and sent to Fort Jackson for debriefing. Not long after, he would be a beach bum in Florida. After being given the ability to go anywhere in the U.S., he, as we are told, could not face his father after his discharge and wanted to get away from the cold of Ohio.